So the first question is this: who spends more on national defense, the federal government or state governments? Now that's an easy one, right? Everybody knows the federal government is in charge of national defense. They spend all the money there. Second question: who spends more money on K through 12 public education, the federal government or state governments? Well, that's an easy one too, right? States spend about 10 times more than the federal government. This year, states will spend about $600 billion on K through 12 education. The federal government will spend about $70 billion. California this year will spend $90 billion on K through 12 education for 6 million students, and only 9% of that will come from the federal government. Public education is very much a state function, not a federal function. Next question: who incarcerates the most prisoners, the federal government or state governments? Another easy one. States incarcerate about 5 times more prisoners than the federal government does. In fact, it was a state, California, that played a major role in launching the incarceration epidemic in our country that started in the late 1970s. That's a subject for another talk. Last question: who has more employees, the federal government or state governments? State governments, 5 times as many. The federal government has about 4.5 million employees. As one pundit once put it, the federal government is like an insurance company with an army. That's because the federal government spends most of its money, 70% of its money, goes to third parties. It goes, for example, to finance Social Security. It goes to, under a voucher system, to healthcare providers. 70% of the federal government goes to people like that. Very little goes to direct service providers. The largest service provider of a direct nature in the federal government is the military. State governments have 20 million employees. State governments are the opposite of the federal government. They are armies of public employees providing the vast majority of domestic services in this country. This year, California will run an education system that is the largest enterprise in the state. The K through 12 public education system is a state-operated enterprise with 6 million customers, 300,000 teachers, and some administrative staff. And the state will guarantee public safety for nearly 40 million residents. The state will provide public education at the University of California and California State University and the community colleges for another 3 million residents. Now, why do you think I'm asking you all these questions? It's because I'm guessing that more of you know what Donald Trump tweeted yesterday or this morning than know the facts that I just told you. The vast majority of Americans pay attention to federal issues and federal politics, even though under our federalist system, states are responsible for the vast majority of domestic services in this country. Especially if you're a non-rich person and you go to public schools, you ride public transportation, you rely on public health, your jobs are regulated by legislators that regulate your industries, your lives are more affected by your state legislators, each of you has 2 of them if you live in California, than by your federal representatives, yet I'm guessing more of you know the name of your U.S. senators than know the names of your state senators. Let me give you an example of what this translates into. California is a very blue state, as I'm sure you all know. Full disclosure, I'm one of those Democrats. The state is dominated by Democrats. The legislature is dominated by Democrats. Most of those Democrats talk a very progressive talk. But when you drill down into how they vote very often in a regressive manner. In 2011, for example, the state legislature voted 3 times to cut funding for the University of California, California State University, welfare, courts, and parks. It was a very tough budget year, but somehow they found enough money for a compensation increase for prison guards, who are already the highest paid prison guards in the country. Over the next 4 years, they found money for 2 more salary increases for prison guards. The net result is that this year, our state, our progressive state, will spend more money just on the compensation and benefits for 56,500 employees in the Corrections Department, who supervise only 128,000 inmates, than our state will spend in total on more than 700,000 undergraduates attending 33 campuses of the University of California and California State University. Let me say that again and put it in another way. This year, our state will spend more than $130,000 per corrections employee versus $10,000 per undergraduate student. Your legislators count on you not knowing that they're engaged in that kind of voting behavior. Now look, prison guards have very difficult jobs. This is not about them, and we should all be grateful that they're willing to take on those jobs. They're also a business interest. Most of the people in this audience probably seek the highest possible compensation for the work that they do. The same thing is true of the pharmaceutical companies, the doctor and nurse associations, the hospitals, and the others who this year will pull out more than $100 billion of spending from our state under a voucher system to provide health care. It's true of all the other government employees who will pull out, together with those healthcare corporations, 70% of state spending this year. They're perfectly entitled to seek the highest possible remuneration for the services they provide, just the way Apple Computer is for its computers, or the phones we all carry, or whatever. But that doesn't mean that the state legislature has to give it to them. Even Berkeley, probably the most liberal district in the state, plays this game. The representatives from Berkeley, again, there are only two, voted for those budgets in 2011, 13, and 15 to give those increases. The net result is the University of California, whose flagship campus is located in Berkeley, its share of the state budget is 14% lower this year than it was 10 years ago. Even though state revenues are up dramatically compared to 10 years ago, UC will get about the same amount of money this year as it got 10 years ago, even though it's hosting more students. Now, do you think that the representatives of Berkeley are walking down the streets of Berkeley telling their constituents that they've been voting to give prison guards increases and healthcare and other corporations more voucher money at the expense of the University of California? You can bet your bottom dollar that they're not, and they count on their legislators not knowing that. If these lights were up and I were to go about this room and point at several of you and ask you, what's the name of your state legislator? I'm guessing the vast majority, well, this is probably a smart audience. A lot of you would mention your US senators or your congresspeople or whatever, and then I'd say, no, I'm talking about your state representatives, and then a few of you might know. But the vast majority of Californians don't know, yet their lives are more affected by a state senator, a state assembly person from this district, than they are by the congressperson from this district or the US senator from the state for the vast majority of services that affect their lives, especially if they're not rich and they can't afford to send their kids to private schools, and they have to take public transportation, and they can't live behind gates and walls and recreate at second homes and depend on public parks and that sort of thing. Look, I know it's very hard for people to know what their states are doing. In California this year, we will spend more than $250 billion. Our state legislature, which consists of only 120 people, will spend more than $250 billion. They will write the education code, the criminal code, the business and professions code, the environmental code, and much more. But you should know at least the basics. After all, states are responsible for public education, public health, public safety, public transportation, safe drinking water, court systems that work, parks that are open for people to use at reasonable fees, laws and regulations that make it easy for people to find jobs and get growing wages. That's all within the bailiwick of the state legislature. At a minimum, that's what you should know. But right now, your legislators count on you not knowing. On the other hand, the corporations, unions, and associations that are collecting those billions from the state government know the names of every one of those state legislators and exactly how they're voting. Your legislators know that too. So it's hard to know, but you should know. And the good news is that you can know and you can have an influence. I've started an organization called Govern for California that supports exceptional candidates for the state legislature that care about something greater than themselves. You don't have to join our organization. You can form your own. California laws make it very easy for you and your friends and associates and family members and community members to assemble enough money, small dollar contributions only, to support great legislators and keep them in office. You just have to start caring, and then you have to start focusing. So get to know your state legislator, get to know what they're doing when they're up there and how they really vote, and then get them to walk their talk. Thank you very much.